Good morning, friends. If you received and watched the video sent yesterday, you would have noticed that it was cut short for some reason. I think there was a glitch in the application which I'm using. I'm hoping that won't be a frequent thing. But in any case, I'm making this shorter video just to offer the conclusion because I think it's quite important just to wrap things up. And there was a page that was left out. Just before getting to that, there were two things I left out yesterday. And one is just to say, obviously, I'm fully aware of the many misgivings and objections that people and even priests and ministers, religious ministers, have about animal sacrifice and linking or associating the Eucharist with sacrifices understood in the Old Testament, and that's oftentimes why religious ministers some religious ministers refer to the altar as a table, and then they will move it, out of the sanctuary and put it somewhere like in the middle of the congregation to try and dissociate it from the ideas and connotations of sacrifice. So I'm fully aware of that, and I appreciate that. I don't know what to say to that really, other than the fact that, as I mentioned yesterday, it's very difficult to shy away from those associations. And instead of shying away from them, let us be candid and open and honest and try to understand them. Because as I said yesterday, liturgically, those associations have been part of the church and part of the celebration of the Eucharist for the last 2 millennia. And also biblically, there's a lot of obviously a lot of material that refers to it. Then the second thing which I left out, you remember when you were talking about the very first reference to blood in the Bible was obviously Cain murdering his brother. And I said that there were two implicit references prior to that, and the one is obviously the making of the animal skins after Adam and Eve sin, and the other one, which is just interesting to take note of, before Cain murders his brother. The other reference is obviously in the sacrifice that Abel offers, because it says in Genesis chapter 4 that Cain was a keeper of sheep. So I mean, what are you doing with sheep? Obviously, people were eating meat at that stage. And it says in Genesis chapter 4 verse 4 that he offered fat portions of the sheep, the fat portions of the sheep. So already there is evidence of cultic sacrifice at that early stage. I don't know if it has any import or bearing. I don't know why. There's no indication I think as to why God was not pleased with Cain's sacrifice, which was fruit and vegetables, and yet he was pleased with Abel's sacrifice, which was the fat portions of the sheep. I don't know if that has any import. Just an interesting verse in verse 7 of chapter 4. After Cain has offered the sacrifice, and it says in verse 5 that God had no regard for his offering. Again, it doesn't say why, but then God says to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well," interestingly, just an interesting verse, "sin is lurking at the door, Its desire is for you, but you must master it. So yeah, just thought I would mention those two, seeing as I left them out yesterday. And then yes, friends, I'm just going to try and briefly conclude the session. So we ended yesterday by referring, I think we ended by referring to the letter to the Hebrews. And I've just said here that there's obviously an understanding within ancient Judaism, or an appreciation in ancient Judaism, of the quality of blood and the quality of different types of blood, or the properties of different types of blood. And I think that is why, so that's why the purity of the animal, or the cleanness of the animal, is emphasized in the Old Testament. That it has to be an animal without spot or blemish. Um, so in some ways, I suppose we understand by that the blood is made more effective. You can't offer an unclean animal for the same way that you can't offer a pig, because pigs were unclean, and obviously in ancient Jewish culture. So, but then trying to shift our focus from the Old Testament to the New Testament, conventional approaches to atonement, the notion of atonement and substitutionary atonement, as this is applied to Jesus. Conventional thinking, I believe, would say that, would take over or follow in this train of thought, that that it's possible for there to be a difference in the quality, or the value of the blood of certain animals. And so, because as the writer to the Hebrews points out, because no matter how clean or pure the animal is, ultimately animals in the Old Testament have a finite capacity to atone for sin. And that's, as the writer to the Hebrews explains, that's why they have to be offered repeatedly. So when we come to the New Testament, and when we come to the image of Jesus as the Lamb of God, something changes, because we're now obviously no longer dealing with animals. We're dealing with the Son of God, the Messiah. So the blood that is offered through Jesus, or the blood that Jesus offers, however you wish to think about it, Jesus' blood is not just any blood. It's perfect blood. It's perfect blood. So its capacity or ability to atone is therefore also made perfect and infinite. So whereas animals in the Old Testament, their blood has a finite capacity to atone for sins, and therefore they have to be offered repeatedly, Christ's blood has an infinite capacity to atone for sins. Yeah, but as I said in this last little section, it is strange and perhaps somewhat ironic, in that, in as much as Christ's blood is perfect, it ultimately has to still be human blood. So it's a bit of a paradox. And the reason for that is because God obviously doesn't have blood. To have blood is an attribute or a quality of a physical body, living being, So, and that's why when the chalice bearer administers the chalice, he or she does not say the blood of God. He or she says the blood of Christ. So, in as much as Jesus' blood is perfect blood, strangely, it has to still be human blood. And so I just said there that it's a bit ironic that the very thing required for the full atonement of humanity is in some ways um, their humanity itself, if that makes any sense, represented by the blood of Jesus, which is still human blood. So in a way, it kind of undoing, um, the blood that we spoke about in the first part of this session, the blood spilt after the first sin, the blood spilt by Cain. It's kind of undoing or reversing that in some way. But yeah, so I just said in closing, friends, that this session, the penultimate session, perhaps begins to provide a new perspective. I hope, at least, that it begins to provide a new perspective on holiness. And so in asking the question, why is blood necessary? We stumble across the realization that the purpose of blood, like that of other ritual symbols, is to maintain and restore order and balance on a cultic or spiritual level. So the two most archetypal symbols, binary symbols, I'm not talking about vague and general ones like good and bad, or lightness and darkness, or man and woman. Although important, I'm suggesting that possibly the set of binary opposites, which are sort of most pervasive, but also which affect us at the most immediate level, are life and death. The binary pair of life and death. And so what I've suggested is that, and I think this is supported by some of the work of the cultural anthropologists we looked at, rituals and rites and ritual symbols are about maintaining and restoring the culturally necessary balance between life and death. And yes, so the beauty and wonder of the Paschal mystery, the central event of the Christian faith, is that Jesus in his life, death, and resurrection represents a perfect restoration of balance in the above-mentioned cultic order. Death has been reconciled to life so that there is no more death, as it is typically understood. Life is also understood differently from now on, and we refer to this life as resurrection. It is neither only life, nor is it only death, but a new kind of life, which in fact has incorporated and superseded both life and death. This process. So I don't know if that makes any sense, and please just forgive me, friends, if I'm coming across as a bit monotone. This is actually the third time I'm recording this conclusion to what should have been just one video, but because of the glitches in the online video platform, I've had to do it now 3 times. And so I suspect that I might have had a bit more excitement the first time I did it. However, I don't know if that makes sense to you. So I think we will also look at this in a bit more detail next week when we look at the closing session. But yeah, as I've said there, this also underlies what contemplatives or mystics, and Richard Rohr often makes this point, refer to as the art of discernment. It's very important, and something that fundamentalist religion or religious groups really struggle to understand. But as I've said, in order to cultivate a mature spirituality, We have to move past absolutes. We have to move past dualistic or binary modes of thought. And this is precisely what is achieved through the Paschal mystery. Because there is no longer life, there is no longer death, right? The old categories have passed away. They've been superseded by something called the resurrection, which is neither just life nor is it just death. It's somehow an incorporation of the two, but is also more than the sum total of the two. So yeah, and I just said that the art of discernment is the ability or grace to move past or incorporate absolute. So no longer thinking in terms of life or death, but thinking in terms of resurrection. No longer thinking in terms of black and white, but thinking, understanding that whereas before, so some of these archetypal symbols like man and woman, we're going to get into this next week, so let me not say too much more about it. But I've just said at the end there that within the German philosophical tradition of early idealism, and the figures like Kant and Hegel. Though Hegel's method is dialectic, I don't know if he ever uses this particular formula, but the very nature of a dialectic incorporates this thinking, because a dialectic is, if you operate by means of a dialectic, it also is not fixated with absolutes, and it's something that's dynamic and something that's always changing. And so they formulated it in terms of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, where the synthesis is, as I mentioned just now, it's neither just the thesis, nor is it the antithesis, nor is it even the sum of the two. It's something that is actually new and different. And so I hope that this has been helpful for you, friends, and I look forward to bringing you the last installment in our Lenten devotion. May God bless you.